Hey, friend, welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today, we're jumping into a conversation about the end of Luke 19, which I mentioned on Sunday is a passage that we almost only read leading up to Easter. This is like Palm Sunday, Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem. And so it was a good opportunity to kind of take a different angle of approach on the text and read it kind of in line with everything that we've been working through.
And also kind of helpful because it doesn't have the palm branches, which we noted, and also doesn't have the hosannas.
Yep. Yeah.
So it is a little bit of a different narrative compared to what you see in Matthew and Mark.
Yep.
And I think John as well. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So some similarities, some differences. There are a few pieces that only show up here or show up very differently here. Than in the other gospels. So I think a good opportunity to take a little bit of a different angle on it. And we hope that our conversation helps you have your own conversations. So again, love that you're listening, and wherever this finds you, hope that you're having a good day and have a conversation because of this text. So Luke 19, we're not going to read it. It's long, but if you need to pause and go and read it, we're 28 verses 28 through to the end of that chapter, so like 28 to 48, so then about 20 verses.
And it covers three different moments that you kind of broke up in your sermon. You got Jesus coming to Jerusalem and arriving on the colt, and then you've got this moment where he approaches the city and weeps over it and has this very significant thing to say about the city, and which we're going to get into, and then the temple, which is often paired together. Is that correct? It's like or at least in Matthew does the same. Yeah, they pair Jesus at the temple and the triumphal entry together. So, three little moments, little snippets into this entry into Jerusalem. Less questions about Jesus's arrival into Jerusalem. That's kind of pretty well-worn territory. Lots of things that you could go down in terms of discussion points. But I think because of the uniqueness of Luke's narrative here, there's something I want to touch on with this second portion. So Jesus approaches Jerusalem and he sees the city, and you pointed this out very well. Like, he wept over it. Like he was lamenting, and you talked about lamenting. Just remind me, as it's not just like sadness. It's about, well, you remind me what you said.
Yeah. So lament is again, I think I said it's not just an emotional response to an event. It's not just grief. And I don't mean just grief. Like, grief is good, but it's not only the emotional response to the loss of something past tense. You're not lamenting over something that happened as much as you're lamenting over what could have been. So lament is active, and it is directed toward God, and we see a lot of it in the Psalms. It is constructive in really great ways. Though I think as a subject of lament, less so just like the quick, albeit, big emotional responses to things that happen. It is much more active and even thought out. It is directed toward the loss of something, yes, but also the loss of everything that could be. And so, as horrendous as it is of an example to use, but I think a good framework or understanding of lament is when you lose somebody, when somebody dies too young, whatever that too young is. I'm not going to suggest different things here, but you're not only are you grieving the loss of that person as they were in the life they lived to that point, but there's also a whole lot of grief that is done. We see this all the time in parents who bury their children. The loss is also all of the life that could have been. And so that's where lament takes on that fuller form of, it is grieving the loss and grieving the loss of what could be and what should have been. And I think that's the other thing. So we see that in Jesus's lament of what should be true,
Yes.
which isn't.
Yes, and so he offers this. I mean, it's a prophecy, but it feels like weird to call it a prophecy because it's Jesus. Like he knows. Like,
Yeah.
So it's not like this prediction that like this might come true. Like but it seems like he made a very bold assertion of what will happen, and in fact, what did happen 40 years after these events
Yeah.
to Jerusalem.
So, okay, let's pause there though, because what you said, I think bears just doubling down on, because it's not that it's a prediction versus a prophecy. It is the truest form of prophecy.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one thing where we see Jesus step into these offices. So we have language around, and we talked about this on Sunday, but language around prophet, priest, and king as being anointed offices that mediated between God and humanity throughout the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And it required an anointing by God that was demonstrated by the laying on of hands, anointing with oil. But we see it in David being chosen to be king. Well, there's a whole lot of other brothers who maybe looked a little bit better and stronger and bigger and faster and tougher and whatever, and David's the one who was chosen to be king. Now, does that mean David lived a perfect life? Absolutely not. Like, he is the epitome of exactly what we're going to talk about. David was king, but if you read any of the Psalms, if you read any of the stories of King David, you know that David was
He was messy.
deficient in certain areas of life. And so he is the anointed king, but he is not a perfect king. And we have prophets who were anointed and spoke on behalf of God and called, like their job always to call the people of God back around to obedience to God and love of God, and to warn that, hey, certain things are going to happen if you don't alter the trajectory that you are on as a community. So again, though, not perfect. You get like Jeremiah, who's a dude just sits under a tree and he's like, I just want to die. I hate my life and I don't like what I do. And I would just rather not be around. Like he is not, he is a prophet and he speaks on behalf of God and he mediates between God and the people of Israel at the time. But again, he is not the perfect embodiment of a prophet, of a person, of a human. And same with the priests, right? So you have priests who are mediating salvation. And now we can even jump to the time of Jesus. They are performing ritual sacrifices. They are performing sacrifices on behalf of people to absolve them from their sins before God. Like, there is some good mediation happening, but there is also a whole lot of corruption.
Yeah.
And, people lining pockets and things that are happening that are outside of what was originally intended for that role as priest. And so again, we get Jesus who steps in to each of these offices and is the perfect embodiment and example of each of them. So as king, he is the fullness of what it means to be king. As prophet, he is the fullness of what it means to be prophet. And as priest, he is the fullness of what it means to be priest, mediating for the sins of the world on behalf of them to God. And so you're right. Like, to say prophecy feels weird.
It does feel weird.
But it's actually the truest form of speaking what is true about people and about the world before God, and what is truest about God. And Jesus is able to do that in a way unlike any other, because he is simultaneously, he is fully human and he is fully God. And so he fully mediates between humanity and God, which is why it's so important. Again, this is a different theological rabbit trail, but it's so important that we don't get into any of, like, all throughout history, like church history, you get these various heresies where people try to describe, okay, how can Jesus be fully God and fully human? Maybe he's not fully God, but he's fully human, and he's the best human that could ever be. And
he's 50-50.
Is it 50-50? Is it 80-20? Like, what is it? And so the church for its entire existence has really stood firm, kind of typical traditional Orthodox, I would call it, say Orthodox theology, has stood very firm on Jesus being fully human and fully God.
Yeah.
And part of that is because we see him then roll into these ways of being that are the truest version of the thing.
So that's really helpful, actually. So as Jesus speaks these words about Jerusalem. This is unique to Luke. And of all the things that Jesus said, that, much of it recorded, a ton of it not recorded. John kind of speaks to that when he's like, of all the things Jesus said, there are so many more. There's no scroll in the world could fill it all. Like, that kind of thing. Like, so Jesus said a lot of things that we don't know about. Right. But he said this, and it's recorded, and it feels important. And yet this is something about the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple that doesn't happen until 40 years later. So I guess the question is, what is the point of Jesus? I mean, obviously he's lamenting, he's genuinely feeling this, but what is the point of this in Luke's narrative here?
Yeah. Well, so I think Luke is doing something theological, and again, different theological rabbit trail, but I'd say power, like enlivened by, instructed by, given authority and power by the Holy Spirit to be writing what he wrote, as opposed to what he could not or did not write. This is Luke writing very likely after the events that Jesus is talking about in the prophecy here,
which is going to hit in a particular way. It's going to hit in a for the readers, the early readers, they're going to be like, whew, yeah, we lived that.
Yeah. And so I think it does a couple things. Number one, though, just before I go too far down that path, it is the only instance that this occurs in this way, like with this stark prophecy. But in Matthew 23, and I found it, so I didn't have to find it. Jesus, there's a similar lament over Jerusalem that happens in Matthew. It is different in its occurrence within the gospel itself. But we get this section where in 23 there's woes that Jesus is speaking. So there's 7 woes to the scribes and Pharisees, and it's after a whole lot of parables. So Jesus has entered Jerusalem already. So in 21 we get the triumphal entry. And then immediately in Matthew tells us, he jumps immediately to the cleansing of the temple. And then in Matthew, we get a number of parables that continue to pop up in that week through Jerusalem toward the cross. And then we get the woes and the laments of Jesus. So in Matthew, Jesus says this, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it, how often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing." So we get a very similar sounding lament over the city. Matthew's just moved it. And then in 24, Jesus actually describes the destruction of the temple.
Right.
So in 24, they leave the temple, and I love this passage for very different reasons, again, that we're not getting into today. But in 24, Jesus left the temple and was going away when his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. And in Mark, there's this great line where the disciples are looking at the stones of the temple, like the foundation stones, which are massive. And they actually say, like, "Oh, look at how big these stones are." They're kind of like marveling at this thing, like, "How awesome are we?" And just like, "Hey, guess what? Not one of these is going to be left standing on another. Like, they're going to be thrown down." And so here it says, "You see all these, do you not?" Question, right? "Truly I tell you, there will not be one here left. There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." And so he's again describing the destruction of the temple here. So in Luke, it happens a little bit different. The language is much more pointed. I think it is obviously shifted in the narrative to where Luke has it in between the entry and the temple. I think Luke is doing something theological. Like the reason I preach the way I preach on Sunday, king, prophet, and priest, is because I believe that that's the story that Luke is trying to reinforce to his readers. Say, hey, like, we need to see Jesus as these, in these offices. And we need to see Jesus as one who, as Luke is telling the story, as all the gospel writers are telling the story, right? They don't want to tell Jesus as a story that is disconnected from the Old Testament. They don't want to tell Jesus as a story that is disconnected from the history of Israel, the people of God at this point.
Yeah.
And Luke is also writing to a mixed audience of people. So he's writing to people who knew the Jewish history and heritage. He's writing to people who did not. And so he is also trying to tell the story in a way that instructs them theologically about who Jesus is as he's entering Jerusalem and what he's going to accomplish. And so Luke has it set up. This is to your question of why. Luke has it set up so that people see Jesus acting, so arriving as king, making prophecy as a prophet, and then acting as priest in a way that fulfills much of and carries forward much of the Old Testament. This is why I get frustrated with people who say, well, we don't need to read the Old Testament. We just need to read the New Testament. Just give me the Gospels and some of the letters and whatever. Who cares about the rest? I just want to know about Jesus. But Luke is making a very, I think, pointed argument that we need to understand Jesus as carrying these offices forward in order to understand what he's about to do on the cross. So Jesus, on the cross, he will continue to be king, he will continue to be prophet, he will continue to be priest, and he will mediate perfectly for humanity on behalf of them toward God. It's just going to look different. He's no less the king. I think here's the point. He's no less the king because of what's about to happen. He's no less a prophet because of what's about to happen. And he's no less a priest because of what's about to happen. In fact, he is the fullest version of those things, even in his death.
Yeah.
And we need to understand that. We need to hold on to it. So we've got that going on. You have a follow-up.
Well, so as you're talking and as I'm thinking that through, I'm looking at the events that are going to unfold in Jerusalem with the destruction of the temple again. That happened, I think, centuries prior to Jesus's birth for the first time.
Yeah,
this
500s
somewhere
BC.
in there. Yeah. And so this is the second time in 770 AD that this is gonna happen, and the temple is destroyed. Much of Jerusalem is razed, and I think we looked up maybe 100,000 people, Jews were killed. Is that
so? Yeah. This is. Josephus writes hundreds of thousands killed, and I think he writes 100,000 is his number that are taken away into captivity again, into slavery, put into colosseums to work and fight, and there's a whole lot of different things that happen. So that's 66 CE. There's a Jewish uprising and revolt against the Romans to overthrow and push out. They're like, we've had enough, we're done. You get this. You get sprinklings of zealots through the New Testament, kind of pointing in that direction. And then in 70 CE, the Roman army just came in and crushed Jerusalem, essentially, burned the temple and total devastation. They surrounded the city and cut off all the supply lines in and out. And that, to the point, is exactly what Jesus is prophesying.
Which, as I understand it, is a dividing line in many ways, even within Judaism, where when that temple was destroyed, it really shifted the way of understanding how they worship and whatnot.
Yep.
And it feels like there's something similar when you talk about this threefold office of Jesus, that hey, this thing's going to happen. And if you weren't certain about it before, the way that you connect with God is going to be very different from here on out. It feels like that's what's happening here. That's what I was trying to suss out a little bit. Yeah.
I think you're exactly right. So Luke is, and here's maybe what's important for the listeners to know. There are two camps when it comes to dating the writing of the Gospel of Luke. But pretty well everybody agrees that it's 60 CE to 90 CE is the range.
Yeah.
Whether you believe it's kind of in that 60 to 70 before the destruction of Jerusalem, or in the 70, and I think most or many current scholars agree it's in that 80 to 90 CE range now. That would be what I would lean more toward that 80 to 90 CE range. There are arguments for both. So Luke, on the one hand, in Luke and in Acts, in neither the Gospel or at the book of Acts, does he specifically talk about the destruction of Jerusalem. He does not name it specifically. But this is pretty close.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think a lot of people point to this text as an argument for, no, Luke is now framing the story of Jesus with the current historical events that have literally just transpired in the last kind of 10, 20 years, so that people, to your point, have a really clear theological understanding of there no longer being a need for the temple. And that's what shifts, right? Is that you're right. This is a clear, like this is a major shift in Judaism toward rabbinic Judaism. So no longer does everything revolve around the temple and the priests, but it revolves around synagogues and rabbis teaching. In Christianity, you can imagine, for many of whom grew up still life revolving around the temple, need to understand theologically the shift that's happened. And so I think that's part of what is going on. There's a really cool shift that happens too in early Christianity, and this might be a rabbit trail that can be cut out, and that's fine. But I mentioned on Sunday that synagogues were oriented around the temple. And so no matter where you were, if you were in a synagogue, the place where they kept the Torah, the scrolls, pointed you toward Jerusalem.
Right.
So when you were sitting, pointing, toward facing the front, you were facing toward Jerusalem. And no matter where you were, that's how the temples were, or the synagogues rather, were oriented. In in the archaeological record and dig, there is a moment where early Christian places of worship, meeting houses, were oriented toward the temple.
Oh.
And then there's a moment where they are oriented toward Golgotha. So they've discovered now early meeting places of house churches and Christian communities where they shifted their focal point away from the temple and toward the place where Jesus died.
Wow.
So even with the architecture, with the buildings that they were constructing and how they laid out their places of worship, there was a shift. And I do think, to your point, that what Luke is doing here is like the theological framework for that shift is away from the temple and toward Jesus. And as Jesus goes to the cross, it's no less away from Jesus back to the temple. This is actually now the place that matters.
And we see obviously later, in the writings of Paul, the expansion of that theology of veering away from temple being central to us as being a part of, we are the temple, and we are mobile temples, and we get to go around. Anyway, we don't have to get into all that today, but it's fascinating. So now moving to the temple specifically, because Jesus then goes into the temple. Enters the temple courts. He began to drive out those who were selling, and he says, "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers." So, pretty intense, we've seen it in various gospels, he flips the tables, and he really gets into it with the religious leaders, really upsets them. But they couldn't find any way to deal with it because it says they hung on to his words, which I think is like a great, just a great image of just these people that were just wrapped up in what Jesus was saying and the truth of what he was saying, the words he was saying. And they were like, we can't do anything about him because these people are enamored. They are hanging on to his every word, which is like a beautiful thought. Yeah.
And I think indicative of still also what is to come, right? How the Jewish leaders were dependent on the goodwill or otherwise of the crowds. Like there's a lot of really, and you can start to understand why, but Rome and the emperor and then kings and client kings were all very concerned about an uprising. Like there was, and to the point, it rightly so, because there was an uprising. So a lot of stock is put throughout this season of life. A lot of stock is put into the weight of the crowds and what the crowds were saying or not. So it's interesting that the Pharisees, they do a lot of work to sway the crowds against Jesus.
Right.
Even you get this with like Barabbas and Barabbas or Jesus. We'll let the crowds decide.
That's a wild thing to do.
Right. So yeah, a lot of weight. Okay.
Yeah. So, so within this this moment here, we're kind of inferring from, we're inferring that Jesus is, the truest priest who is cleansing his temple. And you kind of alluded to that we can, as the church, as individuals, we could be guilty of that same level of distortion for what God intended, corruption of what God intended. And I wonder whether we could get a little bit more specific on that. What are some ways that us as the church or even as individuals are capable of that sort of like, not just like sin. I mean, like that's one thing, but just there is something particular about this sin in that it is done kind of almost in the name of God, that they are trying to, a distortion of what worship ought to be.
Yeah. So the first thing that I notice is Jesus always says "my house," which is like the most bold theological. Like this is, if Jesus is not accurate here, if he's not right, this is the most outlandish form of blasphemy at this point for him to say, like, my house will be. So what is he saying? He's saying that the place that was built to house God, for God to dwell, so that people could come and communicate with God, that place Jesus is claiming as his house. So he is openly and boldly, brashly saying, hey, I am the God who called you to build this temple. It belongs to me. It is mine. So that's the first thing that I notice. My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of robbers. So the direction that we can go, I think sometimes is, well, these were money changers, and they were, so again, don't need to go all the way through this, but people would travel from all over to come to the temple to make a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so you wouldn't bring an animal with you. Like you wouldn't drag along an animal with you.
Could you?
Unless you were very wealthy.
Yeah.
But many people didn't, and so they brought money. Well, you couldn't use your money. You had to exchange your money for the temple currency, and then you had to use that temple currency to buy an animal. And I think what many people just point to is similar to tax collectors who are sitting and tolling the roads in and out of certain cities, like Jericho is one of them. You're like, okay, well, what's the toll? Well, it's $3, and I'm going to give $2 to the toll booth, and I'm going to take $1 into my pocket. So, a lot of people talk about how this, even in the money's being exchanged and the purchase of animals, it was certainly it was directed much more toward those without than those who had means. And it was also just fraught with corruption and potential for corruption. And so we see Jesus confront it. So obviously there's something happening, right? Like it would be dismissive to say, well, we don't really know what they're doing. And maybe they were, maybe they weren't, who knows, right? Like Jesus confronts it. So obviously there's something going on. He has an issue with how they are mediating on behalf of God. That's really, at the end of the day, that I think that's what he's pushing against. And so we see this throughout church history. There are moments in the Reformation where the Reformation was fought over similar ideology to this, right? Paying for absolution of sin.
Yeah. Indulgences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, we see it recurring where the church seems to go, okay, well, some sort of exchange happens here. So I think we could take it in that direction, but I want to take us in a different direction. Jesus says, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it. And I think that one of the dangers for us is, just like we can make God in our own image. So there's this great line where God made humanity in his image, and we've been trying to repay the favor ever since. Where, we as human beings try to remake God into our image of what we want him to be or not be, because maybe we don't want the judgmental God, we want the loving God. And maybe we don't want the one who confronts us, we want the one who comforts us. And so for our own comfort's sake, we try to negotiate, okay, who is this God, and what's he really gone about, and what's he not, and how do I have to live? I think we can also make I'm not, what I don't want to do here is draw a one-to-one comparison between the church and the temple, because they're not, and you've said that already. But I think we can create an image of church that is what we want, as opposed to what maybe what God is calling us to be about. And we can create images of community and of church and of what that looks like, that plays to, what is going to, maybe what's going to attract the most amount of people. So on the one hand, we can go in that direction. On the other hand, we can create an image of church and community that we want and that we are comfortable with. And so I'm not criticizing big churches and I'm not criticizing small churches, but churches can do a really good job of criticizing each other and saying, well, we don't want to be that. We're better off the way we are because we don't want to be like that, whatever that is. And so I do think that that's why I zero in on this: my house shall be a house of prayer. And prayer is absolutely fundamental, so important. If we do nothing else as a church, let's continue praying.
Yes. Yeah.
But I even back it up to my house. Who gets to define who we are? Who gets to define what we're about? Who gets to define what the mission is? Who gets to define who our target audience is? Well, it's not us, right? It's not me. It's not the church. But I think churches typically are pretty good so we have conversations that go like this. Let's not make this change, Justin, because I happen to know, and I don't know, and we have very, very clear guidelines about this, but you have a conversation. I happen to know that so-and-so gives a whole lot. And I know that they wouldn't be happy if we made this change, Justin. So let's not make that change, because we don't want to tick off this family who gives a lot and who serves a lot. And so we're not going to make this change, even though you might be saying, hey, this is exactly what God is calling us to do. This is exactly who God is calling us to be. And I'm convinced, and you got where, you can see where this goes.
I'm having like a little small T trauma response from previous experiences. Yeah. So I'm tracking.
I'm sorry. So I think that this is the way that we can fall into this kind of trap where we play to the comfort of those who are inside the church and to the detriment of who Jesus is actually calling us to reach. So I'm sure that there was some conversation, and I'll just use, and I hope that this is not the example that you're thinking of, but we before I got here, we opened as a satellite location of the food bank. And I'm sure that some of the conversation was in sort of this line, is this something that we feel God is calling us to do? Yes or no? Okay. Well, what about the people that it's going to attract? Do we really want, what are we opening ourselves up to? Is there going to be, is stuff going to start going missing from the church? What's going to happen? Is this something is there really a need in our neighborhood? We're kind of in a wealthy-ish neighborhood, or we're in a subdivision, at least. We're out of downtown. And I'm not criticizing people for how decisions were made. I think we made the right decision because it's open, and I love it.
Yeah.
And when we were looking at coming to the church, when I was looking at, is this a place where I could feel like God might be calling me to become the next lead pastor, that was something that started to win us over.
Yeah.
So the garden won us over. The food bank won us over. Partnership with another church in our building won us over, because each of those decisions are distinctly, we are going to be a little bit uncomfortable because we believe that this is what God is calling us to be about as a community of faith in our community. But you can see how those decisions go a different way when you start to say, well, maybe we shouldn't open as a cell. That sounds like a lot of work, and maybe it's actually gonna it's gonna confront us with some things that we kind of like that we're out of downtown and we don't have to be. We don't have to see the need and this and that, and you could see how you could quickly make a different decision that is less, I think, honest to the gospel calling.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, okay, let's have a partnership with another church in our building. Great, cool. What's that going to mean for us? Like, are we going to have tight timelines? And what about our space? And what about our ministries? And what about our this? And what about our that?
And what if we don't agree on everything doctrinally?
Exactly.
Yeah,
and what's it going to say? And no, the man, I love intentional partnership with another church trying to reach our city. Like, well, what if they start stealing people from our church? Who cares, man? Like, you can see how those types of decisions go one way or another based on who you are prioritizing. And so I just want to shout out my church because I love that we do those things.
Yeah.
And I think that each of those decisions could have been a moment where you prioritize internally versus externally.
And I think a lot of churches, and I think Courtright has been, our church has been at times wary of this, is that there is a bit of a wariness at times of like getting like boots on the ground type work, hands a little messy type work, and part of my heart for this community and for, I mean, really all church communities is like, hey, we need to be willing to get our hands a little messy. We need to be willing to confront difficult situations and sometimes difficult people and marginalized peoples. And that is in many ways central to Jesus's mission. And so it should be central to ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think comfort is the enemy of growth. And what I mean there is all kinds. Like comfort will kill your own spiritual growth, your own discipleship, your own, like in the name of comfort, if you are pursuing comfort, you will not grow in a relationship with Jesus. It's not intended to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And comfort will kill organizational growth. If you're making decisions based on what is the most comfortable right now, you will not grow as an organization. In fact, I think the exact opposite. You will quickly begin to shrink and lose sight of what the mission actually is. And I think that works on a personal level. I think that works on a corporate level with spiritual growth and depth. I think it works on an organizational level with numerical growth and organizational, like even just sustainability.
Yeah.
They're as soon as you start prioritizing comfort. And so I'm not saying that that's exactly what Jesus is going after here. What he's going after here is an institution, a place, a process for mediating salvation that has lost sight of who God really is. And that's why he goes in strong. He says, my house. And you, in other words, I think what he says, you made it into your house. Like you're not building your house. Like, we're not building my house. We're not building my church or your church.
Which is a danger for us all.
Which is a danger,
you know,
absolutely.
and just to kind of like, there's the church aspect that like, hey, we as church leaders, we have a massive responsibility to shepherd this community well and to go take us in the right direction, and not just us, but our elders and leaders in many ways. But then there is also something at the individual level that it's like, okay, man, we need to like deal with some of that discomfort, and we need to like figure out what's going on there. And so maybe that's something, you know, a little bit of homework, a little bit of something for if you're listening and you're like, okay, I feel that I've felt that tension. I felt that discomfort. And maybe I need to do something about it. Maybe I need to pray into that a little bit more.
Yeah. What makes you uncomfortable?
Yeah.
That's would be a good place to land. So
this chair is making me uncomfortable right now. So
we hope that you've had a good hour or so, not quite hour. And we hope that you have some good, meaningful conversations about faith. And to Justin, your point, what would make you a little bit uncomfortable in terms of your next step, be it in a relationship with Jesus as an individual personally, or be it into community? And what might God be trying to say to you in that discomfort? It would be a great place for us to land. And until the next episode, we hope that you have a good week.